Abandoned in a freezing storm, a wheelchair-bound woman's only hope for survival lay in the courage of a Navy SEAL and the loyalty of his K-9. It was a cold winter evening, and the wind howled through the small, isolated neighborhood where a middle-aged couple lived. The house, a modest wooden structure, sat on the edge of a quiet road, surrounded by tall trees whose branches were heavy with snow. Inside, the air was tense and filled with frustration. The husband, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and rough hands, had been arguing with his wife for hours. She, a gentle woman in her early 40s, had been struggling with her mobility ever since a severe accident left her bound to a wheelchair. Despite her vulnerability, she tried to reason with him, speaking softly, hoping to calm the storm that seemed to follow them wherever they went. The argument had started over something. Small, perhaps a missed payment. Perhaps an unspoken resentment, but as the evening wore on, it escalated into harsh words, accusations, and silence punctuated only by the biting winter wind outside. The woman's hands shook as she gripped the arms of her wheelchair, her mind racing, trying to remember the good moments they had once shared. She remembered their first meeting, the way he had made her laugh, how they had dreamed of traveling together, of spending quiet evenings by the fire. But tonight, those memories seemed like distant echoes, drowned out by the cold reality of the present. The snow outside was falling heavily, blanketing the world in white. The streets were empty, and the nearest neighbor lived miles away. The woman knew that if she was left outside, help would not come quickly. Her wheelchair, a sturdy but heavy device, made it difficult to move through the snow without assistance. Every inch of the yard would be a struggle. The cold, sharp, and unrelenting had already begun to creep into the room, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. She wished she could speak in a way that would reach the part of him that once cared, hoping to remind him of their shared life, their love. But the husband, consumed by anger and frustration, did not listen. His eyes were cold and his movements were sharp and deliberate. Without another word, he grabbed the keys from the table, opened the door, and stepped out into the snowy night. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the woman alone in the silence of the house. The snowflakes drifted down steadily, landing on the windows and roof, creating a muffled world outside that seemed far away from her frozen reality. She wheeled herself closer to the window, peering into the storm, hoping that he might come back. Hoping against reason that this was just a terrible moment that would pass. Minutes stretched like hours. The wind outside grew stronger, making the wooden walls of the house creak and groan. The woman's breath came in shallow gasps, partly from fear, partly from the cold that had started to seep through her thin clothing. She reached for her phone, only to find the battery was low and the signal weak. Panic began to settle in, a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She had been taught to remain calm, to think clearly in emergencies. But the fear of being left alone in the snow made her heart race and her mind spin. She thought about the worst-case scenarios. Hypothermia, frostbite, even death the cold was not something to take lightly. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself she would survive, that she could find a way to signal for help. But the isolation of their rural home made every plan seem fragile. The driveway was covered in snow, the garden gate blocked by icy branches, and the road beyond completely invisible beneath the winter blanket. The house, once a safe haven, now felt like a trap. Her mind wandered to memories of her family, friends she could call if only she had the strength to reach them. She remembered how her mother had always told her to be resilient, how her father had taught her to stay calm in emergencies. Those lessons came flooding back now, forcing her to focus on the small things she could control, moving the wheelchair closer to the door. Keeping her legs covered with a blanket, trying to conserve heat, she knew she could not panic. She had to survive until help arrived. Hours seemed to pass as the storm outside intensified. Snow piled up against the doors and windows, and the world became a blur of white. The woman sat in her wheelchair, shivering, listening to the wind and imagining the vast emptiness of the frozen landscape beyond the house. Each gust sounded like a warning, a reminder of the danger she faced. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief that someone she had trusted, someone she had loved for years, could leave her in such a situation. Yet, deep down, a small spark of hope remained. She told herself that she was strong, that she had survived hardships before, that somehow she would survive this too. As night fell, the temperature dropped further. The house grew colder, and the shadows cast by the flickering lights in the room seemed to move with a life of their own. She wrapped herself tightly in the blanket, clutching the wheelchair's armrests as if they could anchor her to safety. Outside, the snowstorm raged on, and the world seemed silent, except for the relentless howl of the wind. In that silence, she realized that her fight for survival had only just begun. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing, promising herself that she would not give up, that she would hold on until someone came to her rescue. And so she waited, alone but determined, in the icy grip of the winter night, hoping for a miracle, hoping for someone brave enough to find her before it was too late. The snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, blanketing the small house and the surrounding landscape in an unbroken sheet of white. Inside, the woman remained in her wheelchair, shivering, her body struggling to keep warm as the cold seeped through the walls and windows. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the wooden beams and the distant howl of the wind. Each gust made the windows rattle as if the storm itself were testing her courage. She wrapped herself tightly in her thin blanket, trying to preserve whatever heat she had left, and attempted to think clearly. She knew panic would not help her. She had to remain calm, even as the situation grew more desperate. She tried to call for help. Picking up her phone with trembling hands, the screen flickered, weak with a low battery, and the signal was patchy at best. Every attempt to dial out ended in frustration. She thought about her neighbors, but they lived miles away, and the snowstorm made travel nearly impossible. She realized she was truly alone, completely at the mercy of the elements. Her heart pounded as fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to take slow, deep breaths. She needed to think, to focus on what she could do, no matter how limited her options were. The woman's wheelchair was sturdy, but it was not designed for snow or rough terrain. She tried to move it slightly closer to the door, hoping to be ready if someone came, or if she could somehow make it to the road. Each movement was exhausting. Her muscles ached, and the effort of moving in the cold made her shiver even more. She realized how vulnerable she truly was, completely dependent on someone else for survival in this unforgiving environment. The thought was terrifying, yet it ignited a quiet determination within her. She refused to give up. Hours passed slowly, the sky outside darkening as evening approached. The storm intensified, with strong winds whipping snow into a blinding fury. The woman listened carefully, straining her ears for any sign of life outside: an engine, a voice, a crunch of footsteps in the snow, but the only sounds were the wind and the occasional snapping of a frozen branch. The isolation pressed down on her, making her feel even smaller and weaker. But she tried to use this time to plan. She thought about every possible way someone might find her, every signal she could make, every sound she could produce. She remembered that she had a small flashlight in a drawer nearby. She reached for it with effort, turning it on and shining it through the window. The weak beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the swirling snow outside. She hoped that if anyone was passing by, they might see it. Minutes turned into an hour, and still, there was no sign of rescue. The woman felt the cold biting into her bones, and her thoughts turned darker. She imagined what might happen if she was left here all night. She thought about her family, her friends, and the life she had before the accident. And a fierce desire to survive grew stronger within her. Her mind also wandered to memories of the husband, the man who had left her here. She tried to understand why he had done it, searching for a reason, a spark of humanity that might explain his actions. But the anger that had been simmering inside her all evening began to surface. She realized that she could not rely on him to save her. She could only rely on herself, on the kindness of a stranger. This thought steeled her resolve. She knew that she had to keep her mind sharp, her body as warm as possible, and her spirit unbroken until help arrived. The night grew colder. Frost began to form on the edges of the window panes, and the air inside the house seemed to shrink with the freezing temperature. She tucked herself further into the blanket, pressing it tightly against her body. Every inch of exposed skin burned with the cold, and her fingers and toes felt numb. She rubbed them gently, trying to restore some feeling, but the cold was relentless. She realized that even small movements could be exhausting, and she had to conserve energy while remaining alert. Every sound outside, every rustle of the trees, every gust of wind became a signal she analyzed carefully. She tried to distinguish between harmless noises and possible signs of rescue. In the midst of the storm, she also found moments of reflection. She thought about her strength, her past struggles, and the moments when she had overcome challenges she once thought impossible. These memories gave her a sense of resilience, a reminder that she was capable of enduring more than she had ever imagined. The cold and isolation tested her body, but her mind and spirit began to rise to the challenge. She repeated quietly to herself that she would survive. She would not allow this night to defeat her. As the hours dragged on, fatigue began to set in. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body ached from sitting in the wheelchair, and her muscles protested every small movement. Yet, she fought to stay awake, knowing that she needed to remain alert. Sleep could mean disaster in the freezing cold. She found ways to distract herself, counting breaths, reciting memories, and imagining warmer places. She even spoke aloud, giving herself encouragement, as if hearing her own voice could strengthen her resolve. The woman also began to consider possible ways a rescuer might find her. She had lived in this house for years and knew every corner of the yard. If someone came, she would need to signal them clearly. She positioned herself near the door and window, keeping the flashlight ready and listening for any sound of movement outside. Each creak or groan of the house, each rustle in the snow made her heart race. She clutched the wheelchair arms tightly, ready to respond if a chance to escape or signal presented itself. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of slowing. Yet, despite the fear and cold, she felt a quiet determination growing stronger. She reminded herself that help would come, that she had endured hardships before, and that she would endure this one as well. The cold could bite, the wind could howl, but her spirit remained unbroken. She waited, alone but not defeated, relying on her wits, her memories, on a small spark of hope to keep her alive through the long, merciless night. Even in the darkest hours, she refused to surrender. Each breath, each heartbeat, each small movement was a victory against the overwhelming danger around her. She clung to the belief that someone, somehow, would come, someone brave enough to face the storm and reach her before it was too late. And with that thought, she continued to endure, holding on with every ounce of her strength, knowing that survival depended not only on her body, but on her determination and courage to face the freezing, relentless night. The phone call came in just as the snowstorm was reaching its peak. A local 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio, reporting a woman stranded in her wheelchair somewhere in the rural outskirts, trapped by the deepening snow. Description was brief but urgent. A middle-aged woman, immobile at risk from freezing temperatures. The storm had made the roads nearly impossible to navigate, and the situation was critical. The message reached a man who had once faced danger on battlefields far from home, a Navy SEAL named Daniel. Though he was no longer on active missions, Daniel had a reputation for bravery and skill, and he now volunteered in local search and rescue efforts. Daniel had spent years honing his senses to notice small details, to anticipate danger, and to act quickly when lives were at stake. As soon as he received the alert, he knew the storm would make the search difficult, but hesitation was not an option. He called his canine partner, Max, strong and intelligent German shepherd trained to track scents in the harshest conditions. Max had been with Daniel through countless exercises and rescue operations, and their bond was unbreakable. When Daniel called his name, Max responded immediately, tail wagging but focused, eyes bright with readiness. Together, they prepared for what would be a race against time and nature. The SEAL gathered his gear with practiced efficiency. Thick insulated clothing, snow boots with heavy treads, gloves, and a headlamp to cut through the darkness were essentials. He packed first aid supplies, blankets, and a small radio for communication. Every item was chosen with precision because, in a storm like this, even minor oversights could be fatal. Max watched him closely, sensing the urgency and determination in his movements. Daniel checked the canine harness, ensuring it was secure. and attached a small pack containing supplies Max might need on the journey. Max barked once, almost as if to say, "I'm ready," and Daniel smiled, feeling reassured by his partner's confidence. As they stepped outside, the storm hit them with full force. Snow whipped across their faces, biting at exposed skin, and the wind made it difficult to see beyond a few feet.
Ow.
The world had transformed into a white blur, and the roads were invisible beneath the thick layers of snow. Daniel moved cautiously, feeling for hidden obstacles. But his training allowed him to navigate the treacherous terrain with skill. Max ran slightly ahead, nose to the ground, ears pricked, following the faintest traces of human scent. Every step was slow and deliberate, as both man and dog adjusted to the harsh, freezing conditions. Hours into the search, Daniel relied on his instincts as much as the technology and maps at his disposal. He listened carefully to the wind, noting how it carried or masked sounds. He watched Max for signs of detection: sudden pauses, quick sniffing, small changes in posture. In a storm like this, the senses had to compensate for what the eyes could not see. The snow was relentless, and the cold was gnawing, but Daniel's focus never wavered. Every minute mattered. The woman's survival depended on their speed and accuracy. At one point, they reached a small clearing, where the snow was deeper and the trees more scattered. Daniel knelt briefly to check Max, ensuring the dog's paws were not injured by ice or hidden debris. Max pressed against him, eager to continue, and Daniel gave a reassuring pat. Then, without warning, Max stopped and raised his nose high, ears forward, tail stiff. He barked softly and began moving with a new intensity, circling an area as if signaling that he had picked up a scent. Daniel's heart quickened, followed, trusting Max completely. The trail led them through dense patches of snow-covered bushes, across frozen ditches, and along slopes that were treacherous under the weight of the storm. Daniel's boots sank into the snow with every step, but he pushed forward, careful not to slip or injure himself. Max darted from side to side, sniffing the air and ground, sometimes pausing to dig lightly through the snow. The bond between them was evident. Should movement of Max was understood by Daniel, each command anticipated without words. They were a team honed by training and trust, ready to face whatever the storm threw at them. Suddenly, Max stopped abruptly, barking loudly, pawing at the snow. Daniel followed closely, heart pounding. And then he saw her, the woman in her wheelchair, partially covered in snow, shivering and weak. Relief and urgency surged through him simultaneously. He called out gently, letting her know help had arrived. She lifted her head, eyes wide with fear and hope, and recognized the immediate lifeline in the man and dog before her. Daniel quickly assessed her condition, noting signs of hypothermia and exhaustion. Her lips were pale, her body trembling uncontrollably from the cold, and she struggled to respond to his questions. Daniel worked swiftly but carefully. He wrapped her in the blankets he had brought, speaking in calm, reassuring tones, explaining that they were there to get her to safety. Max stayed close, nuzzling her hand with his nose, providing warmth and comfort in addition to his assistance. The woman clung to the blankets and the presence of these rescuers, the contrast to her husband's abandonment striking her deeply. Daniel's movements were precise as he helped maneuver the wheelchair through the deep snow, using his strength and experience to avoid obstacles while keeping her stable and safe. Every step back to the main road was a challenge. Snowdrifts slowed them, hidden ice threatened slips, and the wind lashed against their faces, cutting through even the thickest clothing. Yet, Daniel and Max moved steadily, their focus unbroken. They were aware of the woman's vulnerability and the limited time. They had to get her out before the cold caused permanent harm. She wrapped the blankets tightly around herself, feeling the warmth of human care and the steady presence of Max, whose body radiated heat and confidence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a point where a rescue vehicle could safely navigate the snow. Daniel carefully lifted her wheelchair onto the back, ensuring she was secure, while Max watched attentively. The woman's hands clutched the blankets, and tears of relief ran down her cheeks. She whispered words of gratitude, her voice trembling, yet filled with the raw emotion of having been found and saved. Daniel smiled faintly, telling her to stay calm and reassuring her that she was no longer alone. Max barked softly, as if joining in the comfort and reassurance. As the vehicle drove away from the storm, Daniel remained alert, keeping an eye on the woman and ready to respond if needed. The snow continued to fall heavily, but the danger had lessened. The immediate threat had been overcome, he knew that. While this storm was fierce, their combined determination, trust, and skill had ensured a successful rescue. For the woman, it was the moment when fear turned into hope. Despair gave way to safety, and the courage of strangers, both human and animal, restored her sense of survival. The journey through the snow had tested all of them, Daniel, Max, and the woman. It had been a battle against nature and circumstance, but it was also a story of resilience, trust, and the instinct to protect life at any cost. In that frozen, silent night, amidst the raging storm, a Navy SEAL and his loyal K-9 had become the lifeline that turned a perilous ordeal into a story of courage and salvation. The moment they reached her, the world seemed to freeze even more sharply around them. The snowstorm was relentless, with icy gusts cutting through the thick layers of clothing that Daniel and the woman wore. The woman, pale and trembling from exposure, looked up at the Navy SEAL and his K-9 with wide, terrified eyes. Her fear was raw, a mixture of cold, shock, and the disbelief that anyone had actually found her. Daniel crouched beside her wheelchair, speaking in calm, steady tones that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the storm. He introduced himself and Max, the German Shepherd, his voice strong, yet gentle, making sure she understood that she was no longer alone, and that help had finally arrived. Max immediately pressed close to the woman, his large body radiating warmth. He licked her hand gently, a simple gesture that bridged the fear she had felt for hours with a sense of trust and comfort. The woman's fingers instinctively stroked his fur, and for a brief moment, her anxiety eased. She had been alone in the freezing cold for so long that the presence of a living, breathing, alert companion human and K-9 felt almost miraculous. Daniel, observing this connection, knew that the K-9 was not just a tracker or rescuer. He was a source of emotional support, capable of calming the woman enough for them. To begin the delicate process of rescue, the first task was to assess her physical condition. Daniel checked her pulse, her breathing, and her overall responsiveness, noting signs of hypothermia, shivering, pale lips, and stiff limbs. Every movement of hers was slow and cautious, weakened by the cold and hours of fear. Daniel wrapped her tightly in the blankets he carried, layering warmth against the relentless winter. He explained that they needed to move carefully, step by step, to avoid jostling her and causing additional stress. The woman nodded weakly, grateful and relieved. But the exhaustion was written clearly across her face. Daniel began preparing to move the wheelchair through the deep snow. It was not an easy task. The wheels were heavy and prone to sinking into drifts. The ground was uneven, with hidden rocks and ice lurking beneath the snow. Every step required precision and effort. Daniel positioned himself behind the chair, bracing his body to provide stability, also keeping a close eye on the woman's reactions. Max stayed slightly ahead, nose to the ground, occasionally looking back to make sure the woman and Daniel were following. His training allowing him to guide without being intrusive as they progressed. Daniel spoke to her in reassuring phrases, letting her know each step was under control. He described the path ahead, preparing her for sudden dips or obstacles, giving her a sense of participation and agency in a situation where she had felt entirely powerless. The woman clutched the blankets, her hands trembling both from cold and anxiety. But she found strength in Daniel's calm presence and Max's unwavering companionship. The bond between them created a safe environment. Even amid the chaos of the storm, the snow was deep, reaching above Daniel's boots in some places, forcing him to lift the wheelchair with careful precision to avoid it getting stuck. Max ran alongside, occasionally guiding with barks or nudges, alert to every potential danger. At one point, the wheelchair's wheels sank unexpectedly into a soft patch of snow, threatening to tip. Daniel reacted instantly, lifting and steadying it while gently speaking to the woman, assuring her that she was safe. Max barked encouragement as if celebrating the small victory, reinforcing the sense of teamwork and trust that had developed between rescuer, companion, and victim. The storm seemed endless, but Daniel knew that every second counted. Prolonged exposure could worsen hypothermia, slow circulation, and lead to serious complications. His mind ran through protocols he had learned over years of training, but he also relied on instinct, experience, and the silent cues from Max, whose senses were sharper than any human's. Each gust of wind, each drifting snowbank was analyzed. Each movement carefully planned to protect the woman while making forward progress. The physical and mental demands were immense, yet Daniel remained focused, knowing the life of another depended on his perseverance. After what felt like hours of painstaking effort, they finally reached a point where the snow was shallower and more stable. The outlines of a road appeared faintly through the white. Daniel knew that the rescue vehicle would be able to reach them from here. Relief surged through all three: Daniel, Max, and the woman. Daniel carefully maneuvered the wheelchair onto a safe patch of ground and used the blankets to shield her from the wind while the vehicle arrived. Max stayed close, licking her hand and nuzzling against her, providing warmth and reassurance in equal measure. The woman whispered her gratitude through chattering teeth, the sound carrying above the storm in a fragile but poignant expression of relief and trust. The rescue vehicle, a sturdy SUV equipped for winter emergencies, came into view. Daniel quickly assessed the safest way to load the woman in her wheelchair. He instructed the driver to keep the vehicle stable while he carefully lifted her, guiding the wheelchair onto the back. Max watched attentively, remaining calm, but ready to assist if needed. Every movement was executed with precision to avoid jostling her weakened body. Once inside, she was wrapped in additional blankets, and the vehicle's heater provided warmth that was almost unbearable after hours in the freezing snow. The storm raged on outside, but inside the SUV, a fragile bubble of safety had formed. As the vehicle moved toward the nearest hospital, Daniel remained by her side, checking on her, speaking softly, and offering reassurances. Max rested his head near her lap, still alert, but now a source of comfort rather than guidance. The woman's eyes, which had been wide with fear just moments before, now shone with gratitude and the beginnings of hope. She realized that survival was possible, that there were people strangers, even capable of extraordinary courage and compassion. The contrast between abandonment and rescue, between despair and relief, was stark and unforgettable. During the ride, the woman's mind reflected on the events of the night. She thought about the harsh storm, the hours she had spent shivering alone, and the fear that had consumed her. But she also focused on Daniel and Max, the teamwork, skill, and determination that had brought her to safety. Every detail of their rescue, the careful steps, the protective gestures, the constant reassurance, was etched into her memory as a testament to the power of human courage and the bond between man and dog by the time they reached the hospital. The woman was exhausted, but alive. Medical staff took over, quickly assessing her for hypothermia, frostbite, and shock. Daniel provided the necessary details about the time spent outdoors, her condition, and the precautions they had taken. Max, ever vigilant, stayed close by, his presence comforting not only the woman, but also those attending to her. For Daniel, it was a moment of quiet satisfaction. The mission was complete, and the woman was safe. Every risk taken, every effort expended, had been worth it. The rescue had not only saved a life, but also demonstrated the extraordinary capabilities of those trained to protect and serve. It highlighted the importance of preparation, courage, and compassion in extreme situations. The woman, once abandoned and alone in the storm, now had a story of survival, courage, and human-animal partnership that would stay with her forever. For Daniel and Max, it was another successful mission. But more importantly, it was a reminder of why their skills, instincts, and trust in each other mattered so much, because in moments like these, they could mean the difference between life and death. The woman slowly regained consciousness in a warm, brightly lit hospital room. The harsh memories of the snowstorm outside still lingered in her mind, the freezing wind, the endless whiteness, the terror of being abandoned. But now, wrapped in thick blankets and surrounded by the gentle hum of hospital machines, she could feel life returning to her cold, numb body. Her lips were no longer blue. Her fingers and toes had begun to regain sensation. The first waves of relief were mingled with disbelief. She had survived, and the knowledge was both comforting and surreal. Medical staff moved around her, checking vital signs, administering fluids, and monitoring for any lasting effects of hypothermia and prolonged exposure to the cold. The woman listened to their professional voices, their calm and methodical care, a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm. She thought of the hours she had spent alone, shivering in her wheelchair, and then of the moment she had seen Daniel and Max, the memory of their arrival, the man in his Navy SEAL gear. The loyal K-9 guiding him through the snow flooded her mind with gratitude and awe. She realized how close she had come to a life-threatening situation and how much courage and skill had gone into saving her. The staff left her briefly, allowing her a quiet moment to gather her thoughts. She stared at the ceiling, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She thought of her husband, the man who had left her in the snow, and a wave of sadness mixed with anger rose inside her. She could not understand how someone she had trusted could abandon her in such a way. The betrayal cut deep, but she also knew that dwelling on it would not help her heal. Instead, she focused on what mattered now, her survival and the extraordinary kindness and bravery of strangers who had come to her aid. Daniel and Max had left the hospital temporarily, but the woman knew they would return, and the thought filled her with warmth. She imagined the SEAL guiding the wheelchair through the snow, Max running ahead, sniffing the ground, alert for any danger. She remembered how calm Daniel had been, how steady his hands had been even when the storm threatened to overwhelm them. And she remembered Max, whose presence had been comforting and encouraging. A living reminder that help had arrived in her darkest hour. She realized that her story was not just about survival. It was about courage, trust, and the extraordinary bond between human and animal in times of crisis. As the hours passed, the woman's physical strength returned gradually. She received nourishment, sipped warm liquids, and allowed her body to rest under the thick blankets. Each small movement was a victory. Even lifting her hands or turning her head was a reminder of her resilience. Nurses checked on her frequently, offering reassuring smiles and gentle words. She felt safe for the first time since the storm began, but a part of her remained alert, as if expecting the cold and fear to return. She knew it would take time to fully process the trauma, to move from fear to a sense of security. Meanwhile, authorities began investigating the circumstances of her abandonment. They interviewed neighbors, reviewed phone records, and contacted the husband. Slowly, the truth emerged. He had left her deliberately during the storm, underestimating both the danger of the conditions and the severity of her disability. The woman was informed of these developments, and though the news was painful, it also gave her a sense of closure. She realized that while the betrayal had been severe, it did not define her survival. The courage of the rescuers had outweighed the betrayal, showing her that humanity and bravery existed even when cruelty appeared nearby. Daniel returned to the hospital later that day, accompanied by Max. Seeing them again, the woman's relief was profound. She smiled weakly, tears welling in her eyes, and reached out to touch Max's fur. The dog responded with a soft nuzzle, his intelligent eyes conveying understanding and reassurance. Daniel checked on her condition, listened to her recount the terrifying night, and offered words of encouragement. The conversation was quiet, but deeply meaningful. The woman understood that the rescue had not just been physical, it had been emotional as well. She had been lifted from fear to safety, despair to hope, and helplessness to the realization that people and animals could act with incredible courage in times of need. Over the next few days, she recovered steadily. The warmth of the hospital, the care of the medical staff, and the support of her rescuers helped her regain strength. She reflected on the ordeal repeatedly, recognizing how fragile life could be and how quickly circumstances could change. She also understood the importance of hope, courage, and resilience. Each time she thought of Daniel and Max, she felt gratitude that went beyond words. Their bravery had been quiet but powerful, a reminder that heroes often appear when least expected, guided by skill, experience, and an unwavering sense of duty. The woman began to share her story with friends and family, recounting the terrifying moments in the snowstorm, the abandonment, and the dramatic rescue. Each retelling reinforced the lessons she had learned, the importance of staying calm, strength of human will, and the extraordinary capabilities of those trained to protect and serve. She also emphasized the role of Max, the canine, whose loyalty, intelligence, and presence had made the rescue possible. The story became a source of inspiration, not only for her, but for others who learned of it, demonstrating that courage and kindness could overcome even the most desperate situations. Months later, the woman reflected on the night as a turning point in her life. She had survived not only because of her own resilience, but because of the selfless bravery of a stranger and his loyal dog. The memory of Daniel's calm determination, the precise movements of a trained professional, and Max's steadfast presence remained vivid. She realized that life could be unpredictable and harsh, but it could also reveal remarkable strength and courage in unexpected forms. Her gratitude deepened as she considered how quickly circumstances had shifted from abandonment and fear to rescue and safety, and she resolved to carry these lessons forward in her own life. She also faced difficult decisions regarding her relationship with her husband. The experience had changed her, reshaping her understanding of trust, loyalty, and love. Though painful, she knew that surviving this ordeal had given her a renewed perspective on life, independence, and the importance of surrounding herself with people who truly cared. She learned to value courage, compassion, and resilience over familiarity or routine, understanding that these qualities were essential in navigating both physical and emotional storms. In the quiet moments of reflection, the woman thought about Max. She realized that his presence had been more than just assistance. It had been a source of hope, a reminder that life could offer protection and comfort in the most dire situations. The bond between Daniel and Max had been instrumental in her survival. She felt privileged to witness such loyalty and skill. She began to see the rescue not just as an event, but as a lesson in teamwork, trust, and the profound impact of empathy in action. By the time she left the hospital, the woman was stronger, more aware of her own resilience, and filled with gratitude. She carried with her not just the memory of the terrifying storm and the abandonment she endured, but also the extraordinary courage, skill, and compassion that had brought her back to safety. Her life had been changed forever, transformed by the bravery of a Navy SEAL and his K9, and she knew that the story of survival, trust, and hope would remain with her always. The storm had tested her in every way imaginable, but she had emerged alive, wiser, and inspired by the incredible kindness and courage of others.